was born here, honey. In the house that Chantel is living in. I live right across the sidewalk.
Okay.
So, but we stayed here. We lived here until I was 17. And then my mom had to have a lot of surgeries. So we went to Denver. And we started living on 9th and Federal in Denver because she was at Colorado University. And from there, we kind of like stayed there because she needed more surgeries than what was expected. And she told me, you have to take care of the kids until I'm on my feet or whatever. And we stayed there. I stayed there until I was, I had just had that one, Samantha. And I said, well, I got married. Oh, I made a mistake. I got married. And I thought, everything is going to be good. Everything's going to be okay. I'll still be able to help all the brothers and sisters, and because I'm next to the oldest of all 9 kids. And it didn't work out that way. When I got married, we went to the reservation to live. So we lived at Fort Defiance in Arizona. And we stayed there until the girls were like, they were already going to be like 7, 9, and 11.
Which reservation did you live on?
Fort Defiance.
Fort Defiance.
So then you came to Colorado, Sue, with the girls after that?
I brought the girls, to Trinidad. And I said, you know what? The house is here. Nobody's fixing the house. It was like deteriorated, to the max. And neighbor was supposed to have been living in it, sending my mom the rent. And he never sent it or nothing. No, because they were living rent-free, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he just let the house go to heck. And I said, oh my God, if my mother sees this, she'll have a heart attack for sure. But everything was like, one of those things. But I said, well, I'm here. I might as well get a job. And I said, let's see what I want to do. Because I had already been working. I can't remember where in the heck I was working then.
Restaurant? You mentioned restaurant?
Yeah, but I usually I worked outside. I did guys' jobs because they pay more.
Right.
And I already had my, during the time I was in Denver, I got my card.
What card?
My card to work out to, because we were building over there.
Okay.
I was in the building trades. And I needed my contractor's card. And I said, that's a good opportunity, Sometimes you have to watch what you ask for.
Yeah, it's true.
But it's okay. It's okay because I learned a lot. I've lived a lot. I've done a lot, And my kids ride along with me. And they tell me, don't ever be afraid to do anything, anytime, anywhere. I said, you know what? If you don't ever say, maybe I could do the job, I said, I'm going to have to smack you because you know what? You could do anything. I said, that's how smart. You are educated. I said, you could go on your education alone. I said, but you know what? Sometimes hands-on approach is the best approach because once you learn how to do the job, then you could be the boss and say, hey, don't do it like that, do it like this. It's not only easier, but guess what? I said, it'll pay the bills. I said, just listen to me. And both of my girls, they went, even though they had that education, all those sheepskins, you know. I told Sam, she said, well, I have my master. I said, I don't give a shit. Get out there and work. You know, because I said, Ethan, if you don't ever know, you know, what the job entails, you can't be a good boss. I don't care how much education you have. And it's the truth, men or women.
It's true. But now,
You need to get your hands dirty.
did you, basically then, you raised the kids alone? Your children?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. Their father died.
And the jobs that you undertook were hard, physical jobs.
Yes. Yes, because that's the ones that paid the money. You know, what the heck you gonna break your hump for if you can't get the money for it? You know, you have, hey, these 3 little girls, you know, they didn't ask to come in this world, but you take care of them. You take care of them, your mama, papa, grandma, grandpa, you know, whatever in the heck it entails.
And the many jobs you had?
Hey, I've had all men's jobs,
Which,
you know. I've had a lot of jobs. But I've had a lot of years at each job and some overlapped. You know,
yeah.
but like legal services, I was there 40 years. 40 years. And I said, God, but I learned a lot. And I got to rub the elbows with all the judges, all the lawyers, all the everything, and quit looking at me. You know?
So you did.
But I learned. And then the only reason I always had to be vice president of the board. Guess why? Because I didn't have a presence in Denver. You have to live in Denver. It stipulates it in the regulations. And I said, oh shit, I go to Washington, I should be able to tell them, hey, you know what? You're stipulating a certain, you know, criteria on there and everything. But there was judges sitting on that board and everything. They said, so it really doesn't matter, you know. You're still our president and you're still making all the... And I said, yeah, but I don't have the title. To me, it was the title thing, you know. And then after a while, they said, oh, don't need it. I found I didn't need it, you know.
Yeah.
What's in a title? I don't know what the heck I was thinking. I think all of us tend to get a little bit, what would you say? It's like a great, oh, I want to be president of this, oh, I want to be president of that. But you know what? You have got to know what the job entails, and you've got to have those work hours. You have got to put your whole thing there. But at the same time, I was still working.
So are you,
You know?
have you basically lived and worked here in Trinidad and most of your life?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, almost all of it, except when I went to Georgia. Oh my God, Savannah, Georgia. I lived for 4 years. You don't ever want to go to Savannah, Georgia, honey. It is so hot there, I swear to God, you'll melt. You melt. And then, you know what? I tell you some other things, but off the record sometime, me and you.
Okay. Now, what about your working into the coal mining area later on in life? Did you, was that your last job?
I got 3 jobs the same time. Okay, I got on the railroad that day. I got on the mine, and I got on the post office. Now it was one of the three. Which one am I going to take? Which one do I really want and everything? And I said, you know what? I want to experience what it is going into the coal mine, because my dad lived with me. I took care of my dad. My kids helped me. My dad lived with me, and my dad was in the coal mine since he was 5 years old.
So he was one of the breaker boys?
He was small. He used to, behind my house over there used to be a mine, and it still has coal in it and stuff, but you got to crawl in like a little hole. You got to crawl in there and take your gunny sack and get the coal to extract it. And that's where my dad started working. And then he went to these other mines. They put him at these other mines, and he was only 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, you know what I mean? And then when he married my mom, it was like he hadn't known nothing else. And my mom says, well, she told my grandma, she says, Bernie makes a good check. And she says, and she says, she says, if it wouldn't be too much, she says, I would appreciate it if you would give him at least half of his check back, so he could, and in those days, it was like $10 a sack for coal. 10 cents. 10 cents. Come on. A sack for coal. You're kidding me. And I said, gee, it looks like a bag of potatoes, those big 100-pound bags of potatoes.
Yeah.
That's what they got 10 cents for. And then it went up to 14 cents. Then it went up to 25 cents finally. Those same little bags. But man, those guys had to work hard, hard, hard. And then he used to work at the Frederick mine. And then he worked at he worked at so many mines and everything. And I says, I wonder why my dad was the only one that used to work at the mines and his brothers didn't. I've always wondered about that. But being that my dad wasn't in my life or anything, because he got black lung, and they sent him to Pueblo. And that's where he stayed for a long, long time. And I told my mom, I'm going to find my dad, and I want to bring him home. And she says, yes, that would be a good idea, because I used to call her in Denver all the time. And I say, Mom, I said, I've always wanted to see my dad. I've always wanted to know my dad. And I said, and I took my brother Fred from Denver, and I brought him to Trinidad, and I told him, guess what? It's a better life over here, and there isn't all kinds of bad people like over there, in the city. And I said, you come with me, and I said, I'll help you and everything. I said, you live with me until you can get your own house and stuff. And he thought, you'll be really happy. I said, I promise you. I said, because, I said, I don't want people saying all our life that we were so poor and, we wore flour sacks and, what the hell? Come on, man. Now, now I'm saying, hey, look at my closets. What the hell am I thinking? And it wasn't about clothes. It wasn't about what you had. It was about just being able to do things. Just being able to call your own person and say, you know what, this is what I want to eat today. And we're not going to have to go get whatever is cheapest at the store or nothing like that. Because in those days, well, you had the lard. Remember, the lard used to come like that. And the flour used to come in the little sacks. And then the sacks got bigger, so you had bigger bloomers. Hey, and you know that damn sewing machine, that Singer sewing machine. Oh God, I hate it today, you know. But there I was, pedaling, making everybody drawers.
Yeah, but.
I said, oh. Sam, see if there's a
Nina?
handkerchief in my purse. I always have a miner's handkerchief because you know what? In the mine, I found out, hey man, these handkerchiefs save your life. And you'd be surprised how many guys were so stupid they got hurt down there. I'm so thankful for Carmen Abeda. Oh, no, I don't want to say that.
Anyway, what about then, Sue, what about growing up and going to school? Were you able, without having to help mom at home, were you able to go on to school with your brothers and sisters and?
No, I was like here and there and there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't like all the time or nothing because we were taking care of my grandma too. My grandma in with us. So we took care of my grandma. My grandma died at 52 of a heart attack at my house in the rocking chair. And she had all the same problems I do. The damn diabetes, you know. And it was like, I said, gee, I used to bring her to Dr. Carmichael. Remember on the corner over here of Animas? And that's where Dr. Carmichael was. And I said, gee, you know, my grandma's coming, and it doesn't look like he's helping her, you know. But my Uncle Richard used to tell me, yeah, he thought, you know, go with grandma and stuff and, you know, make sure that he checks her over and everything. But he'd always say, all he was concerned about was blood sugar. Your blood sugars die. Your blood sugars die. Well, what the hell? You think I want to hear that every day? Hey, I know it is. You don't have to tell me. I poke it every day to know that I get.
Now, what about, Sue, what about the family traditions and stuff? That you celebrated those with family and like Christmas and Easter and whatever there was. Families get together and celebrate.
Everybody came to Sue's house. I swear to God, I don't give a shit if you lived in Alaska.
Okay.
You'd be at my house. Because
Holidays?
I'm the only cook. I'm the best cook in 10 states, I guess. I
They
said,
came there.
what the heck? And you know what? And I always was so proud because I could cook anything. I cook from empanaditas to bread to, you know, to the rolls to the whatever in the heck you wanted to eat. Plus the whole Christmas dinner, the Easter dinner, the day, you know. And then everybody would call me, hey, could you please send me some burritos? One of my friends is going that way and everything. And if you could make her a dozen, I'd appreciate it. What the heck? So on my little bit of spare time, instead of me, you know, paying attention and doing this and that for my kids or for myself or anything, I was cooking for somebody else. But I said, damn it. I said, thank you, God, for letting me wear all these hats. Because I've worn a lot of hats, you know what I mean? And I said, shh, just like the day they gave us our pink slip at the mine.
What is the pink?
I'll never forget that. October the 3rd of 1981. I was coming out and I was so black. And what's his name said, hey, you little nigga. And I said, yes, what can I do for you? But I didn't mean to say the bad word. Nix the bad word. He said, Sledge, he says, we're getting our pink slips. And I told him, are you kidding me, man? And I said, oh my God. I said, that's the worst thing that could have happened to me right now. I told him, you know what? I said, I'm having a lot of problems. And I says, you know, things aren't very good on the outside. And I said, I should have all that money in the bank. And I thought my old man was taking care of all that money in the bank. Well, he wasn't working, but he was spending it on all these women. And I said, oh my God. And I said, you got to be kidding. And then I found out I was broke. And I said, and they gave me my pink slip. I said, oh.
So was that when you were laid off?
Yeah. And you know what? The next day I went to the sheriff's department and I told Filbert. I told him, Sheriff Garcia, I said, do you know who I am? And he says, I sure do, Sister Sledge. And he says, what could I do for you? I told him I need a job, and I need a job in the fastest way. And I told him, what do I have to do and everything? And he says, well, he says, I'm not going to tell you you have to go through CLETA right now. He says, because I see that you have your kids and you're a sole parent and the father is deceased. And he says, I'm going to give you a job. And I said, I'd sure appreciate it. And I said, inside or outside? And he says, what difference does it make? And I said, I guess none. And I told him, okay, thank you, sir. I sure appreciate it, you know. And he says, go to the Undersheriff Larson and tell him that you're good to go. And I was like amazed. I was like,
Yeah.
you know how you get like that, like a little kid. And I went hopping out of the sheriff's department, and he said, oh shit, I forgot to talk to Larson. So I went back and I said, hey, I said, Popo was there. And I didn't know Popo that good, but I knew him and I knew of him. And I said, hey, I said, where's Larson at? And he says, who in the hell knows? And he says, he has to be on a call. And he says, but he says, I don't know where he's at. He says, I can give him a message when he comes back. And I said, I sure appreciate it, you know. And he says, okay. And he says, write it down on this piece of paper and everything. And he said, damn, lady. He said, shit, you know how to spell and everything? I said, oh, yeah. I told him I'm educated. And he says, wow. So he said, why don't you fill this out? And he said, instead of taking up all kinds of time, he said that we don't really have. He says, go ahead and fill this out. So I filled out the paper and everything, and I was good to go. I went home. I went home singing and laughing and clapping and, you know. And I said, gee, man, I said, you know, things are getting easier and easier for me. But I stayed there for 15 years, you know.
And you're a woman alone, and you're a woman surviving the children. You have to, that's what it is. But what about your work in the mine? And that's tough work.
Hey, nobody thought I was going to handle it. Nobody could. And those guys were amazed. You should see all of them. I thought they didn't like me or anything because they didn't talk to me or nothing. They were like amazed. They were amazed. And they said, shit, Sledge, you know, hey, your name is appropriate for you. You know what I mean? And they said, we are so proud. We are so proud to have worked with you, you know, because before I got in the long wall, that was my permanent. But before I was in the long wall, I was 6.5 panel. And then they sent me to 3rd South Barriers for a little while. And then I was in, where in the hell was it? Where Frizz used to work. I can't remember where in the hell she used to work. I was with her for like a week and stuff. And they says, you know why we're sending you to these sections, right? Because they were sections, and I was used to working in the wall. And I says, man, they won't let me sign out and everything. And they said, no, because we want you to go in there. We want you to show them how to do this work. And I said, what? I see, I thought I didn't hear right. But they said, yeah, we want you to show them how to do this work and how to do it easy and fast. Because if you put out 120 cars a night of coal, free gloves, and those gloves you depended on free boots. But I said, shit, man. And I said, hey, how come we didn't get our boots? You know, I'd always like go and, you know, I'd let them know or something, or I put it on my basket or something, won't go in the bathhouse, or, you know, clip it on the board or something. Somebody go and rip it off. I tell them, hey, you know what? You guys aren't too cool, because guess what? I said, a lot of these people, I said, that can't afford them, even though they're working down here, have lots of big families. And you know what? They're counting on that, on their damn boots. I said, look at, man, I said, you know, I said, it's so cold down here because you know how they pump in the air, right? Well, you try working and sweating and everything, and you're sweating constantly in there. And when that cold air comes down that shaft, and you know how big the shaft is, because they got to chop off the ice. So it's big enough for the air to come in so you can breathe. Or else but it's like, hey, you learn a lot of things in there, but I learned how to do everything in the wall. I learned how to do everything. And I worked and worked and worked my butt off and everything. And then pretty soon, all the guys I used to work with and everything, they weren't there no more. There was only 3 of them left. And I said, what the hell happened? I said, we're the only ones that are doing the work, and we were doing hard work, you know what I mean? We're shooting the wall. We were from anywhere from dynamiting to making sure the water-powered jacks were up, to drilling the wall, to freaking, you know, we did everything. We did the tailgate to keep it like open, so we had somewhere to go in case the head gate crashed, you know. And I used to always tell Rodolphe, because he was at the head gate, hey, make sure, I said, that we have air coming down here. He said, Sledge, don't worry, he said, I'll make sure you're breathing. You're the best worker I've got.
What about did you like your work there? Was it interesting enough for you there, the work?
Oh, hell yeah. You know what? You learn so much. And you know what? All the guys got to know me and stuff. And they weren't assholes with me like they were in the beginning. And they said, gee, you have our respect, Sledge. And you know what? Come over here and we'll train you on this. And we'll show you how to do this. And we'll keep you safe and everything. And they did. They did until they weren't there no more. Either they quit or, you know, they got hurt or they couldn't handle it no more. Yeah. But I was there. And Bones showed me. I'm the first woman that ever ran a shear. Because my boss told Bones to show me how to run the shear. And then he says, okay, come on. He says, come on, Sister Sledge. He says, you're going to run the shear. And I told him, really? And he says, yeah. And he says, man, I don't know how we're going to do it because you're going to have to lay on top of the gator. And I says, oh, shit, I'm gator bait. I told him. And he says, no. He says, you just, if you think you're going to get caught up, he said, stop shearing the wall, because we had to shear the wall, you know. And he said, just stop. And I said, okay. And I got caught up a couple of times. And then after that, I start learning, you know what I mean? And then I ran the first double-headed shear. And I don't know where in the hell we got that shear from, because they said that they had never made a double-headed shear, but it came from across the seas somewhere. But I said, man, but they taught me everything.
And they taught it right?
Yes. Those guys were fantastic. They were fantastic. You know, Yolanda, I gained so much respect. You could not believe it. I said, shit, sometimes I felt like crying, but I never let them see the tears. I cried home. You know, I could wait till I got home. But they were so good with me because they taught me everything to be safe. They went over the city mile and they said they had never taught another woman that. No, the women that went in there for 1 or 2 times, maybe 1 or 2 days, a shift, they couldn't handle it. They said, shit, Sledge, what the hell? You know, you're coming out and you can just see the whites of your eyes. They said, shut up, you know.
Yeah, now this, I've always wondered, and to me it's a compliment for you. The name Sister Sledge holds a lot of respect for you, and I want you to tell us how you got that name.
I was working in 6.5 panel. I said, oh my God, are you kidding me? I said, they had me over here. I said, breaking this damn coal with a sledge. I said, are you kidding me? And I said, what the heck did I do? I wondered what the heck I'd done for a whole 2.5 months. Yolanda, I didn't do anything wrong. I can't remember doing anything wrong. I didn't even take my lunch. I didn't nothing, you know. And I was wondering what the hell I did wrong, that I was being like, I thought they're just being mean, you know. Guess what? They needed me so bad because I used to break the sand rock. You're not supposed to be able to break sand rock, stupid. Hey, by the time I found it out, I had already broke it and thrown it on the belt. I told him, okay, that's one for you. You know,
Yeah.
you know, all this, he left, trick you out down here. There's so many volts will kill you if it knocks you against the wall, you know. I said, okay, you guys. I said, guess what? I have something in store for you. They moved me quick. I said, son of a gun. I was, you know, and there was a sledge. And I said, shit, and I got big. I said, wow, and little tiny, and, you know, I was all happy. But I pretend like I was mad, you know. And I said, shoot. And I said, damn it, man, but that name stayed with me. And I messed up my jaw because when I hit the wire, I hit that wire a certain way, the sledgehammer came back and went and knocked me out. And I said, shit. And I said, and nobody came to check on me or nothing, man, because they figured, hey, shit, she got it together. We don't need to check on her. I was all jacked. I said, oh, shit. You know, a couple of teeth. I said, shit. But it was like one of those things, you know, and after that, I noticed everybody, you know, they would like pick up the mic, and you're not supposed to use any of that down there unless it is an emergency, that somebody's hurt or you need somebody. They pick up the phone. Hey, Sister Sledge, how's your face today? That's all I got. And after that, everybody started calling me Sister Sledge. I said, oh, shit. But, you know, all in all, hey, hard job, but I could do it. And I said, damn it, I could do anything. And I've always prided myself. I don't care what it is I get into. I could do it, Yolanda. As old as I am, I have senior moments sometimes. I can still do it. Because you know what? It's not all the time you could have senior moments. Sometimes you just eat some of that granola shit. and you kind of become clear, you know. But, oh my God,
Sue,
it was hard down there.
sure.
fantastic. It was fantastic, but you know what? I look now and I say, gee, man, my knee, my back, my shoulders, and everybody has the same problems. Because when I go to do my knees and everything, I say, oh, my coal miner friends in there, all the guys. They said, geez, Sledge, we're so sorry, you know. And I said, hey, don't ever be sorry. Don't ever feel sorry for me. I'm going to tell you why. I says, because I could do it. And I said, and I showed you up, brother. And I said, and if your wife ever asks me, I'm going to tell her too. Hey, that was just a smart remark. But yeah.
So what would you leave, like, advice-wise, experience-wise, to the kids, or however this is going to be utilized, type of advice about your experience and the life that you lived thus far that could help in some way? What advice would you give, or words of wisdom that you would offer those that will leave behind?
You know, Yolanda, these kids better start getting it together. They better get off these drugs. They better stop talking back to their parents and grandparents. They better stop a lot of the shit they're doing. And you know what? The parents are actually afraid of them. And I told them, how could you be afraid of your own child? I said, you know what? You don't have to hit that child, but quit giving it money. Quit buying it state-of-the-art shoes and clothes and shit like that. I said, I did the same thing to my little twins, you know? And I said, and they started acting like that. And I said, hey, you know, yous are in college now. Don't play with me. Don't play with me. This old dog bites. But these other kids, the ones that are up and coming, because I've had a lot of foster kids. See, you have to understand that. And they were from different parents and different criteria and everything else. But I'm telling you one thing. If you don't teach these kids respect and you don't get them soon enough, you're not going to have nothing, Yolanda. Hey, these women, these girls now, they're having these babies younger and younger. But you know what? They're not even respectable. They're not even educated. They're not intelligent. They're not nothing. What are they going to show those kids? I want you to tell me. Because it's important. If we don't get our kids, you know, pretty soon by the back of the neck and say, hey, you know, I don't want to grab you like that, or I don't want to hurt you, because it hurts me. But you know what? You, God blessed, better have some respect. And when I send you to school, you have respect. When you talk to elders, you have respect. When I send you to the store, you have respect. When you go in a restaurant, you have respect. When somebody does something good for you, you have respect. That's what it's all about, is respect. These kids do not have any of that. I said, I'm damn tired. Now, I want to know what the heck you have to say. Because these kids, and they could be your grandchildren. And you know how we have a tendency to let things go by? Guess what? We can't do that. We need to stand up and we need to say, hey, guess what? You're in timeout. So get your little butt over there, and you know what? I want all of that swept. And if it's not swept good, tomorrow you're going to re-sweep it until I like it. Because, the teachers are having lots of problems with these kids. And they're saying, hey, you know, we go to the parent, Sue, and we go to the grandparent, because most of the grandparents are, you know, raising these kids now. And I told them, man, I'm telling you. And I says, but you know what? I said, what you have to do, I said, is get that kid by the scruff of the neck and say, hey, you look brat. Hey, you little girl. You know what I mean? You're not going out. What the hell do you mean you're going out? You're 12, 13, 14 years old, 10 years old, and you're going out with that little guy? I wouldn't let you go to the dog fight with him. For one thing, he does not dress adequately. For another thing, he looks like he just came out of the circus. And you want to go with him? I don't think so. Get your little ass over there and show me that you know how to cook and wash dishes. But I don't know how to cook. I said, exactly. See? And that's where they fall down at. And a lot of the problems that we had in legal services, and I used to tell them way back when, because I was with legal services for 40 years, you know. And back then it was public defender and legal services, right? I used to tell them back then, you know what, your kid that we're dealing with now and all the problems that you're having now, they're going to be at the public defenders in another year or two because you're not doing anything. Sure enough, I didn't lie. And then a lot of them, when I take them in the sheriff's department, you think I wanted to take them in? Come on, Yolanda, it hurt my heart. You know? It's my job. It's what I had to do. But there's a way, there's a mannerism that you can make it a little bit better. But damn, man, these kids make it hard because they do not have the respect. And I said, you spit on me. Go ahead, spit on my badge. I'll knock you into Sunday ball. And I says, and I'm going to tell your mama and your grandma too. Do you know my mama and grandma? Yeah, you better believe it.
Small town. Well, Sue, great words, great story. I enjoyed a lot of it because now I know a lot more about what you've done and what you had to do, and appreciate all the work that you've done. Appreciate the fact that you were able to come to the interview and assist us. And I thank you for everything you've done. I didn't realize you did so much.
Oh, Rita.
Now we need your picture.
I've been like a doer, like forever, like that kid. Mm-hmm. That kid's a doer. She has done it since she was little. Her sister has done it since she was little. I tell Chantel, you think I told her I'll smack you upside of yesterday, girl. I said, do you see that Simpsons arrest up there? Guess what? It has another side. I told her, don't give me no shit. I said, and why are you hanging around with those kids? Hey, if I wanted you hanging around with those kids, guess what? We wouldn't be living in the house. We'd be living in the projects.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, it's like, oh, geez. Man, sometimes you don't want to tell your kids that, but you know what? Yolanda, that's right.
Yeah, I understand.
That's right. And I said, gee, and it gets tougher and tougher.
It does.
I have a question for you.
What, honey?
Because we talked about it earlier, you mentioned the names of some of the other women who've worked in the mines. And I was wondering if you could go ahead and give us a list of some of those names, women or their nicknames.
I don't think any of them had a nickname except
Okay.
me.
Well, you said Frizz. You had a Frizz.
Oh, Frizz.
Yeah.
But no, Frizz was Frizz before Frizz was Frizz. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Roberta Denton, oh, you would have liked her. Oh, shit. She has hair like,
Yeah.
she still has the same. I told her, Frizz, but her hair's natural curly, you know, and she's always,
That's good.
yeah.
But her name is
Roberta Denton.
Roberta Denton, and then there was Sam Backa. Go ahead. Your name.
Yeah.
I think you know them all.
Mary Rose. Joanne.
Patty.
Patty Furphy. Linda.
Yeah. There were quite a few. I think there were
I think there was like 12.
12 for sure.
There was like 12 that stayed, but you know what? The other ones started and stuff, but they couldn't hang. within a week, they were gone. They couldn't do it, you know, and I said, hey, if you can't do the job, it has nothing to do with you. You can't do the job, you know what I mean? It's not your cup of tea. Go on and go look for something else, something better, honey. I said, don't be trying to kill yourself down here or nothing, and, you know, don't cry, and don't show weakness. As soon as you show weakness, I said, these guys are going to, you know, but there was more than that, women, because there was like, oh shit, I could tell you some stories.
There were quite a few, I know 12 for sure.
Yeah.
I think that was it, right? When
Yes. Huh?
Gloria McIntyre,
Oh, Gloria's carried her.
yeah.
She's carried
She
her.
probably sit there and learn, I guess, or,
Oh, yeah.
Who?
Mantelli.
Tony May.
Tony May. Tony May. One time I hit some guy for what he done to her. I told him, don't you ever disrespect her again. Well, I did.
Yeah, it would be
Hey,
long.
he and you know what? All she was doing was working. She was just working. And she worked hard. Tony May, now, she was a worker. You know, she'd get her ass off that buggy, and she'd help me shovel sometimes. And then I tell her, Tony May, can I throw this on the back of your thing and you rock dust all the way down? I says, so when we get out of here, we'll be able to, you know, just go down and follow the damn rock dust, because you had to walk so far down from the long wall, from the big long wall. The little long wall was Fred Medina's, you know. And Fred, he had a little tiny, I said, oh, how cute. You know, but, well, we shouldn't even be looking up. We should just be looking this way, because most guys couldn't even stand up in there.
No,
And my head, bam, bam. That's why our necks are all banged up. You know what I mean? But I said, shoot. Who else was there?
well, I remember Patty Furphy,
Okay, she used to hang around with Linda.
yeah.
You know.
Was Linda Miner?
Yeah,
Okay, there was Linda Montoya,
yeah.
Patty Furphy.
Those were the partners.
Okay, Sue Erdman, Leanne Avila, Sam Baca, Gloria McIntyre. Were both the Cortez girls there? Joanne Muniz.
Mary Rose didn't stay there very long.
Okay, but she was there. Mary Rose.
Yeah,
And then Joanne Muniz.
Joanne, her sister,
Okay.
and Gloria were the only ones that went to the other wall.
I'm missing 4.
That other long wall? I mean, that other mine, the Maxwell. And I told, I can't remember if the DA was there then or what. And I told him, hey, I said, my friend came for a job, and I said, you promised me that you would let her work up here. And I said, and she's down there. And he said, would you rather go down there and I'll bring her up here? And there is no answer to that. You know what I mean? And I told him, would you rather work in the long wall for me, or would you rather me go start walking right now? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
But I wonder if he would have ever done it. I was ready to call him on it, but I didn't want to disrespect him anymore. You know, I had already, you know how they hate that. Yeah. I can't remember any, oh, I know. What in the heck's that girl's name that started? And before 2 or 3 hours was up, that guy said, hey, that girl's down there, and so-and-so, I can't remember where they had put her and what panel they had put her in. He says, she's down there. He says, she won't come out of that, the little rock dusting area. And he says, and she's crying. I said, I'll go get her. Because she was scared.
Scared
And
stiff.
she didn't know what she got into, poor little thing then. I said, you know what? You want me to tell him to take you up? And she said, I'd appreciate it. And she says, I'm gonna be a quitter. I'm gonna be, she says, my kids aren't gonna have no respect. I told her, honey, you know what? Don't worry about that. I said, guess what? I said, you're alive. You can cry. And I said, and you can feel and hurt. And I said, and who in the hell cares? I said, because tonight you're going to be by yourself. I told her I wish I could go with you and, just soothe your little, you know what I mean? Because she was like devastated. But she said, this is terrible. This is like in hell. And I told her, oh, don't say that.
Well, it wasn't for even some of the men. There was some men that
Poor
go
thing.
one day and
Yes.
it wasn't the kind of work for them either. So
Yes,
it
there
was
was
both
2
ways.
other girls that had started. I can't remember what the heck their names were. And they didn't even last the shift.
Yeah.
But I went ahead and I told so-and-so, or I called so-and-so, or, and I say, hey, don't say nothing, but could you have, them taken up to be seen by the doctor? Because, Leroy was up there and he used to be the nurse.
Yeah.
So I said, tell him you have to see the nurse right away.
Yeah.
That way you don't lose faith.
Sure.
And everybody says, I don't know what happened to them. They disappeared and they never came back. And I told them, and it's none of your business.
Daisy, thank you, Sue, and appreciate your
Hey.
coming and taking the time.
Yeah,
For
you know
us
what,
and-
Yolanda, I had to come and talk to you. I said, oh my God, you know what? I have to thank Mike, because when Mike was there, he was really, really, you know how he's like real soft-spoken and everything. A lot of people had respect for him, a lot of those guys. And I told him, hey, I said, you know what? I said, why don't you go and and I says, and I'll call Mike Romero. And I said, and he'll be down here in 5 short. Well, I didn't even know Mike was on duty or nothing, because they had changed me from day shift to swing shift to graveyard to. I said, shit. And then they had me doing 2 shifts, so I was doubling. I said, oh my God, the money was good. Oh, but the hours are tiring. I said, oh, son of a gun.